content from all over the world who are out of the ordinary, who share adaptable, actionable, real experiences and insights, as you know. Today's guest is someone really exceptional. You know how I know? From the hundreds of messages that we've received all through the day from audiences who are waiting excitedly for her. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Nandita. I know you all know a lot about her. She's had acted in over 40 films, as well as directed some awesome, exceptional films like Firaaq and Manto. Nandita has also directed a lot of short films. Nandita has been a very well known social issues advocate, and in 2013, she became the face of Dark is Beautiful campaign. We'll talk more about it soon. Currently, during lockdown, her short film on domestic violence, Listen to Her, received a hugely positive response. A writer, a filmmaker, social issues advocate, a champion of so many causes, a mother, a traveler, so many things and more. I'd love to welcome Nandita Das on from the Nandita,
Thank
how
you,
are you?
Raga. Thank you.
What a pleasure
I'm
to have you on our show. Thank you very much.
well. Thank you.
We were going to talk
It's
about
been a mad day today, actually, because of the announcement made by Hindustan Lever, which is very welcome. But so for me, this is kind of a downtime. I'm going to actually enjoy it at the end of a mad day. It's really nice to have a meaningful conversation.
I hope you have a tea or a coffee or whatever drink you want so that we can have
I've
a
got
very
some
chill.
pani, some water.
Wonderful. And the audience is really looking forward to you, Nandita, and for us to find out from the other side. You know, we were going to talk about from fire to freedom, which we'll still talk about, but I want to talk about freedom actually. I want to start with that,
Mhm.
just what you said.
Okay.
I think today's a landmark day, right? I mean, you're trending on
And
social media.
in
It,
many ways, I mean, it could be seen, cynics would see it as tokenism, somebody would see it as, PR exercise, etc. That, by just changing the messaging, you're not taking the brands, you're not taking the product out of the market. For those of you who may not know, just to say that Hindustan Lever has announced that they are going to stop their fairness messaging, this fair and lovely, including fair and lovely, which is almost like a euphemism for this obsession with fairness. So they're going to remove all words like whitening and fair and all of those words out of their world of marketing. So in many ways, it is a landmark day, but time will tell us what are really going to be the long-lasting impacts of it. But at the very least, it's definitely brought back the focus to these issues, which has been hidden in plain sight. And I think this whole protest around the world on Black Lives Matter
yep.
has sort of brought it into sharp focus. It's these protests, you have to be part of it. I mean, even if it just makes good business sense. But I don't want to be cynical. I think today is still a day to celebrate the fact that needle is moving in the right direction, and every drop counts.
Yeah, I know we were following you all day. I mean, every time there was something happening, we were on media calls ourselves.
Yeah,
And
I was being bombarded
yeah,
because I've by default become the face of this campaign, Dark is Beautiful, which I revamped kind of last year and called it India's Got Color, which sort
right.
of celebrates diversity, and it's more inclusive than having the pressure of being dark and being beautiful. Being beautiful is too much of a burden on women. I don't think we should be carrying it.
So,
So by default, I'm the face of it because I think many actors are progressively becoming lighter and lighter with every film. So not by design, but so yeah, I was getting a lot of calls about it and reactions to it.
but Nandita, do you think, like you said, it's tokenism? Maybe I know the cynical side of you saying
Who
that, but do
knows?
you think that the narrative is going to change with this? Because similar thing happened in the LGBT space as well, right? But do narratives?
Yeah, I think everything matters, right? Every small. I mean, it's George Floyd wasn't the first African American man to be killed, to be abused, and there have been protests before. Black Lives Matter itself is not a new protest phrase, but it's sort of got a new energy. It's got a new momentum. Sometimes I think it's just a matter of a tipping point.
Sure.
Like, I mean, in many ways, I think, like, for instance, in LGBTQ space, I would say Fire was a landmark film. Whether people liked it or not, whether they agreed with it or not, you couldn't ignore it. It
Correct.
forced people to talk about it. And when you bring out something in the public domain, and when views and opinions and all of that flies all around, I think it does shift, because a lot of the times we just uh, shove things under the carpet. We just feel that, okay, if you don't talk about it, it's either going to vanish or it's not going to matter. But when you bring it out, you're forced to look at it, and then you're forced to do something about it if it isn't right. So in that sense, I think, yeah, today is an important day.
It is an important day, but a lot of these issues come up. People talk about it, they make these comments, and this huge kind of conversation around it for a while, and then it dies down. So I
Yeah,
just feel
to
that
sustain.
yeah, so we should sustain this, right? And
I think anything that you really believe in, if you're driven by true conviction, I think it will sustain. And there
sure,
will be some who will always sustain it, but yes, to kind of catch the public imagination, a collective, when there's a shift in collective consciousness, it is not always easy, because also there are so many issues. I mean, the pandemic itself is such a big issue, and it has thrown a lot of other inequities in its wake. But I think there is a greater acceptance of wanting to see those social evils, if you may call it, that are also coming out, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's child abuse. I mean, so many different issues are finding a certain amount of voice in this time, because everything is sort of surging, everything is accentuating, it's all sort of peaking in different ways. So I mean, even if it is a tokenism, I'm saying, even if it is just being politically correct, but I don't think we should be too cynical, because when something new happens, we have to see what opportunities it brings with itself, and how we can seize the moment and further the conversation. And that's really up to us. We are all complicit in it, so
sure.
it's really up to each one of us.
Because we talk about society quite a bit. Like all of us will say society is doing
Yeah,
this, society is holding us
yeah.
back, society is the one who's talking about
But
dark.
what's it made of?
But who is the society, right? We are the
Exactly.
society.
Yeah,
So
we
I
are
mean,
the people.
yeah, because I've grown up in a household where my sister, for instance, was slightly darker skinned than me, and I remember when my mother was looking for suitors for her, she would tell me, make sure that you don't come out to the lounge,
Yeah,
yeah, because just in case. And that used to happen quite a bit. And this fascination that we seem to have for light,
yeah, obsession.
yeah,
And in
it's
a country which is brown, I mean, it's got different shades of brown, but like 80% are probably this color, and you're making me feel sort of, small or unworthy, or
exactly,
discriminating against it. I mean, after I started supporting this campaign in 2013, I can't tell you the horrific stories that I have heard. I knew this prejudice existed. As a dark person, you can't ever escape it, even though my immediate family didn't put this complex at all in my head, because parents can be pretty cruel too sometimes, and luckily my parents didn't. But I think my own understanding about the issue, that how heightened it is, really came after I joined the campaign. And so many women would share their stories, men too, would share their stories, from women wanting to commit suicide, from women coming and saying, okay, I've got these two daughters, exactly like what you said, Raga. One is a little lighter and one is a little darker, and the lighter one is becoming a bit arrogant. The darker one doesn't want to go to school because everyone's teasing her, that is she really her real sister, and things like that. So I think I didn't think it deserved sort of a standalone attention. I have to
yeah,
confess that when they came to me, I was like, women go through so much, right? From cradle to grave, the- from female feticide to dowry deaths to sexual abuse to, abuse at when you're a widow, etc. Really, just the skin color. I mean, it's important, but does it really deserve a standalone attention? And I was so wrong. I mean, it definitely, the campaign has validated a lot of the
sure.
women in terms of how they feel about themselves. And, so in that context, I mean, we are always othering anyway, right? We are
Yeah,
discriminating, whether it's in terms of, sexual preference, whether it's gender, whether it's religion, whether it's caste and skin color. So there's no end to it. So
sure.
whatever brings us closer and whatever makes us more human is
True.
definitely something we all have to champion.
And the biases that it creates, right? The unconscious
Yeah,
bias. That's also,
unconscious bias.
yeah, and we don't even realize the things that we are unconsciously doing
And we
by
all have them. I
we
think we
all
all have them about something or the other,
yeah,
An unconscious bias, because it's unconscious, in some ways, it's the most difficult to combat,
correct.
because you're not even aware of it, because it's been normalized for so long that it's part of your conditioning. It's like that's how you think, and to change, to be aware of those, and to be working with your own self to get out of that rut of having those biases and prejudices is not easy sometimes.
Sure, and so it is very important for people like us, right? I mean, we are all storytellers. You're a wonderful storyteller, and you express your stories in so many formats. So how?
I try.
No, but you do a great job, right? And you have such a huge following. So if you say something, that's a huge number of followers who follow your, your conversations, and I hopefully they get inspired, then they use that. But what about everyday people like us? Who how do we change our own conditioning, Nandita?
But conditioning, and that's, I mean, I might have a slightly larger area of influence. It's not about number of people. There are many more who have, bigger followings and all of that. If you get trapped in that, then you are working towards increasing your following as opposed to being true to yourself and expressing yourself and caring about, I mean, if you care, then you itch to express because you want to share it, some amount of helplessness sets in because you feel it is not coming out enough, we are not doing something about it collectively and individually. So I think it for me to express through these different things, whether I'm speaking to you, whether I'm writing a column for a magazine, whether I'm acting, whether I'm directing, whether I'm doing some social advocacy, whatever, all of these things are just my own desire to express and connect with people and reach out and share. And I have grown, I've grown hearing people, seeing films, reading books. That's how we all grow. So you want to sort of, keep that cycle going. But I don't think I think all of us grapple with these unconscious biases and, these prejudices. It's not that somebody has a greater area of influence that they don't. We all do. It's really about just being more aware of them and having a good group of friends and people who will point out when when you display your unconscious bias. I think if we have yes people around us, or people who just sort of sycophants, and that can very easily happen when you are in the public domain, when you have some kind of a voice, then it's very easy to just have sort of sycophants who are all the time praising you and saying nice
Great.
things. It's very, very important to have good friends, family who criticize you, who are critical of your when you falter or when you
True.
display any of these biases and prejudices, and we have to listen to them. So I value those friends and people in my family who point out those things in me, because that makes us better too.
Sure, sure. I lived in different countries. Right? I've lived in New Zealand for 10 years. I'm in London for the
Mm.
last 10 years. I spend a lot of time in India because of our business speaking minds. And I find that our diaspora, the Desis who
Hmm.
live overseas, who have basically come here 50, 60, 40 years ago, they haven't really changed. They hold on to the old traditions, the old culture, the way they were. And I
Yeah,
find it fascinating, but I find it very disturbing for the new generation.
absolutely.
And
No, yeah,
yeah,
sorry, go
and
ahead.
that is the thing that I keep saying, that how do we change that? The backwardness of the forwardness of people, you know?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I do a lot of talks in the US, in UK, in Australia also. I've done some. And I'm now no more surprised because I've been doing it for many years. But I remember early on, I used to think, my God, they are in this first world country. They are used to more, modernity of ideas and more freedom. And why are they so much more parochial? You meet almost your counterpart there, and you find, but that is a problem of, in some ways, in othering. What happens that they become the other if you're a brown person in, let's say, in a white country, largely a white country or whatever, and you're being looked at in a certain way, and you want to keep your Indian tradition and you want to be modern. And sometimes Indian tradition boils down to either religion or Bollywood.
Right.
It's very difficult to define what is it to be an Indian. If you ask me what is it to be an Indian, I don't think about it because I am an Indian. I live here. This is where I grew up, and the wonderful thing about India is that it is no one thing. It is an amalgamation of so many different things, and so many different cultures, and every religion has contributed differently. And it's there is open-mindedness, there is orthodoxy and conservatism, but there is also a lot of open-mindedness and rebellious voices, and a lot of women, strong women, who are also speaking up at various levels. So I think in some ways NRIs, what we call, or the
Yeah,
Desis, I don't blame them, because they are trying to sort of juggle between these two identities. And the older generation that probably went in the 60s, wanted to kind of get assimilated in that new country that
sure.
they went. So they tried to be that, and they tried to raise their children becoming more American or more English or more Australian, or Kiwi, or whatever it may be. And then suddenly the children are of another culture. And then the
Yeah,
parents want them to suddenly be desi. They're like, oh my God, you're too Western. Or, you're too, you have to be more Indian. And again, the only two ways they feel is to be going to the temple,
yeah,
or, or watching Bollywood. But that's
yeah.
not real India. And I find a lot of young people wanting to come back to India to explore the real India. And I've
Sure.
met some really great young people who are kind of wanting to come here. And I believe that as long as we are not narrow minded, as long as we are not parochial, we can be this and that.
Sure.
And, who do we really want to be is a question that each one of us has to answer. And, how do we have a sense of rootedness, and yet we embrace everything that's good that may come from anywhere.
That's the right word, I think. Rootedness. How do you stay connected to your roots at the same time, wherever you are, whichever country you are in, you have to
Yeah,
assimilate
you
there as well,
come
right? You have
back.
to take, because that's the whole idea of moving to another country. Somehow we need to find a balance,
Yeah.
and I hope we do, because I've had some not very good experiences with the desis in New Zealand, unfortunately. When my story,
Yeah,
yeah, when I came out there a long time ago, my first real bad experience was from a very interesting Gujarati woman who came from the middle of nowhere into a shop which was completely unknown when I was with my two kids. And she basically just pushed me, shoved me, everything was
wow.
falling all around me, uh, kicked me in the tummy and spat
My
at me.
God.
Yeah, yeah, she was
Really?
very, yeah. And she said,
Wow.
homebreaker. And I'm thinking, whose home did I break? If anything, I basically had moved out from my own marriage, not anybody else's marriage. So they can be very harsh because
But they
later
are also
on,
victim of their circumstances. They
true,
know no better. They have not
correct,
been told. They would people would join a mob lynching somewhere and hit a person who they don't even know, or would troll people that they have never met.
correct.
But still opposed to people in love. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
strangest thing. We have created a very ugly world too. But
sure.
what gives me hope, that there are also a lot of good people. There are a lot of
Same.
confused people.
Yes,
So, I say, like, even in films, a lot of the times people say, oh, but these days films are so regressive, or films are teaching. I said, whatever there is, if I love my freedom, I want to respect everyone else's freedom. So instead of wasting time criticizing that, let's strengthen the alternate narrative. Let's strengthen the narrative that we believe in, that is
sure.
more inclusive, that is more respectful, that is more compassionate. And, so might as well use that energy to build those things instead of having to fight, because there's just too
Sure.
much violence in the world anyway.
Absolutely. And that brings me to the conversation that we were going to start with, which is about fire. So
Yes.
24 years ago,
24
huh?
years.
24 years.
Can
That's a
you
long
imagine?
time ago. Wow. I still
I do
remember
myself realize I'm now
mine.
24 years older.
24. My life has actually transitioned with fire, just so that you know. 95, I got married.
Oh,
And 96,
oh,
your movie was out. And 98, when we finally watched it, it was just like, wow. And at that time, personally, I hadn't even considered that thought, because
right, as
I
a
just
choice,
had the
yeah.
kids. My twins were born in 98. So I just had the kids. Life was magical. It looked like
Oh,
perfect. So, but I have seen the
wow.
transitioning, and I remember at that time theaters were being burnt and your posters being burnt around. And I two questions I have. I've got many questions about fire, but the first thing is, how did you first of all decide at such a young age to act in a film which was completely a game changer, right?
Controversial,
Controversial. It was a taboo subject. Nobody even talked about homosexuality.
right? But to be honest, stories like what you said about how it impacted you, I think it's these kind of it sounds anecdotal, but these kind of stories that keeps you going. Sometimes you feel like, what is it that motivates you to do the work you want to do? It's that even if you've touched a few lives, and and I meet a lot of people, especially women, who have come out after seeing the film, or have shown the film to their parents to start a conversation, or have just felt kind of there's a certain reaffirmation of their beliefs that has happened. Yes, so 24 years ago in 1996, I was very young, and I had no desire to get into acting. I didn't I was doing my master. I finished my masters in social work, and I was working with a couple of NGOs, one after the other. I worked in two NGOs working on issues of women and children. And through a friend, I got to meet Deepa Mehta, and then she said, she just gave me the script, and I read it, and then we had a lovely discussion. And before that, she had said she was going to audition me. And after our chat, and she said, I don't want to audition you. And I was the first one to be cast. So I had no idea that it was going to be with Shabana Azmi. So when she said, oh, Shabana Azmi is going to do this, I said, shouldn't you be auditioning me? I mean, she's an actress I've grown up admiring and, watching.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I'm completely sure that, you're going to be doing it. And at that time, because I didn't really want to be an actor, there was no second film. So now when people say that that was such a bold first film, but when you don't even know there's going to be a second film, you don't think of it as an act of courage. You just feel like I just did it because I thought it was a powerful story. I grew up in a very liberal household, and it was very inclusive. We had people coming from all over, and of various identities, including gays and lesbians, but we never talked about it openly. It was something that you kind of just understand, and you intellectually sort of say that yes, everyone has a right to live their own life, etc. But I hadn't quite understood it emotionally. So I was just drawn to the story, and I was like, oh, this sounds like a very compelling story, and I'd love to be part of it. And that's all. I didn't think of the consequences. I didn't think of, what's going to happen after that. I didn't think of anything. And I just literally jumped into it. And even during the film, it's still it was a new medium. It's also very technical. And there were these three hetero women trying to do a story about a same-sex relationship. So our own biases were sometimes coming up, and I think my own journey of understanding the other, really, I owe it to Fire in many ways, because what it did to me, I mean, now if I champion the cause, is because I have grown through that whole journey, and because of the film. And after we finished the film, there were all kinds of responses from people who sort of looked at me and said that was a very bad film, and you're going to make everybody a lesbian. And I was like, wow, in 2 hours, if I'm going to make people lesbians, then considering most of our stories are about Raja, Rani, and king and queen, then there shouldn't be any lesbians to begin with, if that's how it is. So from people hating it, to people loving it, to people questioning that why does a bad marriage, why do two bad marriages have to bring women together? Why can't it be for other reasons? And very valid questions. But
Sure.
it was a nice, gentle entry in a very, very patriarchal, traditional society as a first film on the subject that really overtly talks about it. I think it was important. So my growth really started with those questions, and how I responded, and how I understood that subject. And so many women would come and share their stories because they felt that there was some sort of I was an ally.
Yeah.
And just to know that our society was so insensitive and full of such double standards, for me it was also a revolution of sorts. And I think I felt more and more compelled to kind of champion the cause, and
Sure.
and then one thing led to the other.
But every role there are points of references, right? So what was your point of reference? Did you completely rely on Deepa Mehta to share, to direct you, or did you have any reference points?
Not really. I mean, there were no reference points. I didn't watch any films, but I think I'm also a fairly instinctive actor. I mean, even after 40 films in 10 different languages, it's not that I do method, or I do a preparation, or I watch something else. Even in direction, because I've not been trained as a director, I really wanted to watch, let's say, other biopics before making Manto, or other ensemble films before making Firaaq. And I ended up doing nothing, because there's never that luxury of time. You're just trying to sort of race against time. So
Sure.
no, I didn't do anything. But if you think of Sita's character in Fire, it is a very instinctive character. In many ways, she's a lot like me, or I'm a lot like her, which is, rebellious, impulsive, says what she feels, spontaneous. And so for me, it wasn't that different. In fact, when I did Earth, which was about partition and about this character, I played Shanta, who, had sort of courts around a lot of these men, and but with innocence. And somebody asked me, saying, "Oh, but Fire must have, to play the character in Fire must be so much more difficult than playing Shanta in Earth." And I said, "No, just because I have to play a lesbian character doesn't become
Yeah.
it's more difficult, right? Because I mean, we are all people, we have similar emotions. Some people are
Sure.
more calculative, some people are more impulsive, some people are rebellious, some people are shy. We're just people.
Correct. So it's
So in
just two
many ways,
people. Yeah.
yeah, it's two people. And in
Yeah.
many ways, playing Sita was actually easier than playing Shanta, and people would sort of laugh and giggle and say, "Oh, really? Was it easy?" And then people sometimes would ask me, "Are you a lesbian?" Like I remember early on when they would ask me that. Right in the beginning, I would say no. I would almost be slightly defensive and say,
Hmm.
"No, I'm not. But do I have to be a lesbian to play a role of a lesbian?" But in the
Hmm.
later years, when people would still ask me that, and I would say, "That's none of your business. I could be not. Like, how does it matter? You just talk to me about the role." Because
True.
my own comfort with the subject was so much deeper. So, in that sense, I also grew as a person.
So you grew as a person 24 years from then to now, right? So have you seen any growth in the community, in the space, in that LGBTQ space?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think there's a huge growth. I mean, I don't know, growth seems too limited a word, but
Sure.
I would say that it this vocabulary, I mean, even using words like gay and lesbian, and today we are talking about LGBTQA,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
That didn't even exist. I
Correct.
remember some of my first interviews, people would not even utter the word homosexuality or gay, or at the most homosexuality, but not even, no colloquial words were used. They would say, "Oh, how does it feel to be in that kind of relationship?" and things like that. So we've come a long way, and I want to believe that even the fact that it has been decriminalized, the repealing of the Act 377, when Delhi High Court first did it, I want to believe that Fire had its role to play, because after that I've really seen lot more people started coming out. Eh, Before 96, if you see, it was fairly sort of hushed and under the carpet. It
Right.
suddenly there was a voice, and people started using that space to share a lot more. And when you share, then you articulate it, and you find the words and the vocabulary, and then you connect with other people globally. And it so I think everything sort of matters. But um, I have seen a huge shift
Sure.
since then. It's just sad that not enough films are still made. I had thought at that time that this is just one film, just as we see so many heterosexual films,
Sure.
about romantic films and all kinds of relationships. It's sad that, that was one situation. It wasn't a documentary, it was a fiction film. There are
Sure.
hundreds and thousands of other situations that could
Sure.
have been explored, and relationships that could have
That's
been explored, and
yeah.
not enough. Films have come out after that, and I'm very thankful for that. Some good, some not so good,
Yeah.
but every film I think helps in just furthering the conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always think, and I had this conversation with someone else, a media reporter today, and I always wondered if Fire was made now in 2019 or 2020,
Mhm.
would the ending be any different?
Yeah, I think the ending would be different. Maybe the story itself would have been different. But when Fire came out, those 24 years were not there before that.
Right.
There was absolutely no conversation about it. Like at that time, people had to almost explain it's a relationship, it's a film about a relationship between two women. And they would say, "What does that mean? What do you mean? They're sisters? They're friends? Like, what do you mean relationship?" I mean, I would have
God.
very, sometimes very visceral kind of a reaction to it. Like I would be on a flight and person sitting next to me saying, I can tell you that I don't even want to see Fire. I've heard you've acted and I believe you've acted well, but I don't want to see such films." And they would get angry with me. And I learned how to argue it. And, instead of getting upset or defensive, I would actually have a conversation with them. And by the end of it, they would say, yeah, I guess we should be making films about different things. And, like, I
Yeah,
guess it's part of life. And then they would share a story of somebody that they knew. And by the way, that person was actually very nice. I said, yes, why wouldn't that person be nice? And then we would talk about it. So, yeah, I think the more open we are, the more honest we are as individuals, as a society, the more we will grow. That I
sure.
definitely deeply believe in.
Fantastic. Section 377, we talked about it a bit. In theory, it's fantastic, right? So it's about freedom not to be arrested for having consensual sex with a same-sex
Yeah.
person. So that's fantastic. But rights, regular everyday rights, and I think I touched upon it the other day when we spoke. For example, my partner and I, if we wanted to buy a property in India, we couldn't get a loan, we couldn't buy a property in our names. Can't have simple things like going for school admissions for my children and putting her name on the form as their co-parent. It has always been a emergency contact, so basic things are not available. I would love to see India in particular giving rights to people like us. I heard,
Absolutely.
yeah, I heard that even if you're in a live-in relationship in India, you have those rights. If you had a child out of wedlock, you still had to have those rights. But as the LGBTQ community, we don't have those rights. So do you think, as a social issues advocate, you think that's something that you believe in and you talk about?
No, definitely. I mean, even in the US, which is supposed to be this big democracy and first world country, there are only some states that have, like Illinois. I know I have a friend and they got married a few years ago. And, they had to marry in Chicago because in Illinois it was allowed. And the other state that they were in, Ohio or somewhere, and it wasn't allowed. So I think everything changes with time. What we can do is try and hasten that change. While so many lives have to suffer, we need
Yeah,
to hasten that change. So definitely this is something that needs to be talked about much more. But even the fact, I mean, imagine an archaic law like Section 377,
mm,
which was, brought in by the Britishers. It's a
sure.
more than 150-year-old law, which the British government themselves had repealed many years ago. We still held it till very recently. So, we are primarily a patriarchal, traditional, feudal society. There's no two ways about it, and all of us have to be part of it. Like, for instance,
Sure.
I have kept my maiden name, and when I was married, a lot of the times they would say, "Oh, why haven't you changed it?" Or, like, isn't doesn't it cause a problem? Like, what is your son? Then he has to have two surnames, and isn't it going to be more difficult? Something as simple as that. I'm like, listen, I mean, it's my name. This is what I grew up with. This is how I identify myself. I feel no reason to change the name. I mean, to my husband's name. So simple things like that. I mean, but I still feel that having the right law is important. It at
Yes,
least empowers you. You're not a criminal. So it
right.
changes the way people are looked at. It's not the end of the struggle. It's probably the
Yeah,
beginning, but everything matters. It's like today's announcement. It's not going to
correct.
change. It's not like colorism is going to vanish and everyone's going to be, be embracing every skin color. No, but at least it is sending out a certain strong signal that this is wrong. We have to call out what is wrong and
Correct.
what is right. So, therefore, I think it's just important that we talk about these issues so that
Sure.
at least, and changing mindset is not easy. If you've had a patriarchal, feudal, traditional mindset,
Correct.
and there has been a certain kind of orthodoxy for, centuries, but definitely we can hasten the process. Sometimes it's frustrating that the change is so slow. You
Yeah.
sometimes feel, what the hell, we're in the 21st century and we're going to the moon and we can't even get this in place. But imagine in a country where the workforce is declining, where
Yeah.
sex ratio is declining, when domestic violence is still like a hushed thing. You're not supposed to talk about it. What world are we living in? We're
True.
so there are many battles to fight, and I think
Sure.
we all have to fight also each other's battles. Otherwise, what's happening? The LGBTQ community feels like they have to fight their battle. There are caste battles, and people of the Dalit community feel that they have to fight. The Muslims feel they have to fight. People with different abilities, people who are differently able, they feel like they have to fight. We all must fight each other's battles too, so
I
that
do agree.
we just want to make a more to make a more humane, compassionate society, we have to kind of not only be in our silos, because otherwise, then we also become like victims, and
Correct.
it can be sometimes counterproductive.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see us as a society that works as a society.
Yeah,
I mean, that whole concept of society is something that is us. I keep telling people, it's not they, it's us. It's us. We are the
yeah.
society.
And
Let's,
also, who is that they? If
yeah,
you, I mean, I want to be part of, if you say in the community, of course, I understand when you are the other, you are up against so much that, of course, you're going to fight about the issues that are closest to your life and that you are struggling with. And you want to make the world a better place through your own stories and your own
correct.
journeys. So, no question about that. We all have to do that. I mean, for instance, we still perpetuate this casteism. It's
Yes,
easy for me or you to say that we don't care about caste, because that in itself is an indication of privilege, the fact
correct.
we don't care. To somebody who is reminded of his or her caste or every single day,
Yeah,
is not easy. For instance, I should be saying they and not his or her. It's politically
yes,
incorrect to be saying that. So it's a learning. So when new words are coming, we're all grappling.
yeah,
But the point is, as long as we are aware and we are moving closer towards a more unified world, and unified in the sense a more compassionate, actually, world, a more sensitive world, where we also care about each other and not only about our issues.
Nandita, you make films which are very socially conscious, right? I mean, not just your mainstream films, but also your short films, Domestic Violence, Listen to Her.
Yeah,
I'll come to that as well.
that was
But
just
would
an
you,
impromptu response to
so would,
domestic violence during lockdown. Yeah.
yeah, we'll talk about that. Want to talk to you about that. But tell me, would you make a film? We talked about LGBT in the mainstream, and you said you haven't seen too many films. You've seen content,
Yeah.
but not too much. Have you considered making a film yourself on this subject?
Well, I mean, I have. I mean, there's so many subjects. There's no dearth of subjects, unfortunately. I have considered. In fact, I was supposed to act in a film which I quite liked the story, and then something happened and it got stalled, and it still hasn't happened. In fact, a young girl recently sent me a film which was quite sweet about two young women and their story. And I said, okay, I'll put it on social media and I'll spread the word. At least other people are making it. I'll support
Sure,
it. Sometimes it's difficult because I'm not very prolific. I do take time.
sure.
Emotionally, it's a very demanding thing to make a film. So it's going to take time, but I'm very open to uh, doing another film. I don't see it as, okay, I'm done with this subject. It's not like that. I mean, this is just that different things that grab you at different times. But if there is an interesting script, worth exploring, I'd be very happy to. It's not only the issue, the story must be told also very powerfully
Sure,
and very
sure.
sensitively.
I'm going to send Onir a message.
Yes.
So in terms of the Listen to Her film that you made, it was so powerful. It said so much without saying too much. Now, what prompted you to make that film?
Well, I was just feeling very helpless. I didn't realize that just being at home could be such a luxury, could be such a privilege. And, we were seeing all these images of migrant workers going back to their homes and being caught in walking for miles, being caught between literally the virus and starvation. 12-year-old girl who cycles and takes her
Yeah,
father as a pillion, right? And, all these kind of horrific stories, and people being beaten up and being sprinkled with fertilizers to sanitize them. It was just horrific stories were coming out. And you just felt very frustrated because we were at home. And I've been very fortunate because of having a child. I have live in health. So I wasn't cooking, cleaning, nothing. I was just like, I was juggling, and I was seeing some people complain, oh God, this lockdown is endless. And what do we cook now? And I just thought, my God, the first world problems are like in the same country. There is so much disparity. And I felt like sitting at home, what can I do? I mean, through a creative medium, I can't tell a story of a migrant worker, but, even at home, for some, this whole irony of stay home, stay safe wasn't lost on
yeah,
us, because we saw, I mean, the domestic violence cases were surging. I have friends who work on those issues. They were telling me that all the helplines were full. Then we were also seeing through friends and other stories that overburdening of work. And it's not just in India, everywhere in the world.
Right.
There were articles coming out in New York Times and The Guardian about how women are just,
Yeah.
juggling between, were just trying to do a Zoom call properly in a
Right.
focused manner. And I thought, oh, that's my life. I do, I'm sort of juggling. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of bring these two narratives together without judgment, without saying that the upper class woman is helping the lower class, because that woman is also in some ways helping this woman to recognize where she's kind of being abused, in an emotional way or in. So I just thought that this was. So I just wrote it actually very spontaneously. I just wrote it one morning. And usually with a script, you can seldom be very spontaneous with films because it requires a lot of people. And once you've written it, you share it with a few people, you tweak, you make drafts, you get a crew. Here, there was nothing. I didn't give the script to anybody. I just wrote it. Next day, I just literally, with my very small team of two people, and on Zoom and all of that, we somehow managed. I had my phone. I literally put it on books. I didn't even have a tripod or a stand. And I told my cook to hold it, and then realized, oh my God, what am I going to record the sound in? Because the camera was too far. So brought in an old phone, and I hadn't even recorded the other voices that you hear, like the woman's voice, the husband's voice, or the
Okay.
cop's voice, pressure cooker, the bell ringing. There was nothing. So I
Wow.
had to kind of imagine all of these. And so it was a bit of a mad shoot, and also direct my son. And so I think I focused least on my own performance, but I just wanted to tell this story. And yeah, then I reached out to a few people to do the post production, to edit, to do the sound. And then I reached out to UNESCO and said, would you want to support this film? Because then you can use it in your work. So they brought in UNICEF and UNFPA and UN Women and South Asian Foundation, etc. So I felt the more people own it, the more they will use it to trigger conversations. I mean,
Sure.
what else can a film do anyway? I mean, it just can spark some ideas, question some things, ask inconvenient truths, and so I just felt like this is, the more people own it, the better it will be. So I've not even had any copyright on it. I've not said this was produced by, here it is, do what you want with it.
So it's free. You do basically whatever
Yeah,
you
it's
want
an
to do with
open
it,
source.
right?
Yeah, it's on YouTube, and you can download it. You can, if you want to dub it, just come to me so that I just make sure that the quality is maintained. But I'm happy for you to use it in the way you want, and so is UNESCO and the other
Sure.
supporters.
Definitely a powerful message, and I think a lot of women would relate to it, and men as well. But a lot of women
Yeah.
related to it
A
because
lot
we
of
were all,
women wrote. I mean, I was just
yeah,
reading the comments, and I
yeah,
was just, so many women were sharing their stories of abuse, of overburdening of work, and it was
yeah.
just. And then, in fact, there were so many such comments that I reached out to some of my friends who run this organization called Akansha, and they had put together a really sort of an almost an exhaustive list of helpline numbers in across 17 states. So I put that whole list on my social media platforms to say, okay, if you're in this part of the country, reach out to this person or this organization, on the ground organizations. So yeah, you try to just do the best you can in the circumstances we are.
It's a simple film, but what a powerful film. I mean, I thank you for sharing that and doing that. It's, I think, I know a lot of
Those
my own
who haven't
friends.
watched it, please
Yeah,
watch it.
please, please
Listen
watch
to
it.
her.
In
It's on
fact, what we will
YouTube.
do after this talk, we will make sure that the link is put up there with the helpline numbers as well, because I've done
That'd
a
be
couple of shows on From the Other Side series and on Totally Out Now
oh,
on domestic violence very, very early on, and it was in the
okay.
first 2 weeks of the lockdown, and we had already seen in the UK about 16
Mm,
deaths purely
my
through domestic violence, and it was very,
my
very
God.
scary at that time. And
No, it's
and
totally heart
imagine,
wrenching.
yeah, it is. And imagine in a country where you have space is not the problem. And then to
Yeah,
have confined
exactly.
spaces and to have to go through something like this.
I mean,
So
I
it was
shudder to think, imagine if you're locked down with your abuser. I mean, what worse can happen, And
what
we think that home is safe. I mean,
exactly.
sometimes we don't realize our privileges, and
Oh,
and we have to help each other. I think this pandemic has taught us that our lives are so deeply intertwined. If I
true,
have to be safe, I have to ensure that everyone else is safe. I mean, that is what
true,
nature is teaching us. It's really up to us whether to learn or not.
true. Nandita, I'm going to, there are lots and lots of comments coming through. I don't know if there are questions. Do you mind if I just take a break and at least
Sure.
acknowledge the bunch of, oh my God, I
Yeah.
think we've got lots and lots of comments. So I don't know whether we'll be able to acknowledge each and every one of you, but thank you, audience. Thank you so much for joining
Let me
in.
see the comments. I can't
There on the
see
live
any.
comments on your laptop on the right side, Akash
Oh,
says, I've had actually quite a few comments
oh,
asking
live
about
comments.
honor killing issues. And I'm not sure it's something that you want to talk about or something.
No, I mean there's nothing that I mean I'm no authority on it at all, but I can just say that the idea of honor killing, I don't think we should call it that word first of all. What is the honor? How can you justify violence? How can you kill someone to safeguard your honor? I just find it absolutely appalling. Honor and dignity are good words, but they cannot be associated with killing. If you love someone and you show that love by killing, recently that happened, right? A woman, she married a man of another caste, and her own parents killed her husband, and now she's fighting the battle and the court case against her own parents. And more power to her, because what kind of family is that justifies killing her own daughter's love? So I think there is no place in a civilized society for honor killing.
Sure. No, I agree with you, and that's one of the things I wanted to actually brush upon when we were talking about the NRI community or the diaspora. It's so common
Mhm.
here. It's in New Zealand, in Australia, in UK, Europe. It's such a common story that you are so petrified of, or so fearful of the choices that your offspring make, that you decide to create this whole honor killing, whatever it's called, and you get them killed. I don't get it, and I hope that
Yeah,
people
you
grow
should
up.
never get it. I mean, there is absolutely can never be justified. I think they should totally be behind bars. They should be abolished. There should be zero tolerance against
So
such
there's
things.
a huge amount of, I don't know, I think the father to my children, my ex-husband is also here. He's saying hello to you, Ravi Kamboj. I
Oh,
think
hi,
you know him from
hi Ravi.
Delhi.
Yeah, I think we met years ago, probably.
So you have lots
No,
of,
I mean, you're
obviously,
inspiring, Raga, with the way you have kind of your own stories. I think so amazing, and having a partner, and then ex-husband who's also understanding of it, and without having to go through this whole guilt and all of that. I mean, anybody who's civilized and sensitive is going to let people be happy and to love. I mean, I totally think if I had one motto, it would be live and let live. And so I totally don't understand when people take it upon themselves and become so righteous that they are going to fix the wrongs by killing someone or by stopping someone from loving. And it just seems like alien thing to me.
no, sure, but also I think we have to be careful. Like in my case, I'm very careful that people think I live a fairy tale life, and I've lived a fairy tale life. One day I woke up, I decided I
There
was
are
going to
struggles
be,
everywhere. No, no, there
yeah,
are struggles
yeah.
everywhere. Like,
But it takes a
when
long time. I said to someone yesterday, a media interview, and I said to them that if you value your relationship, you've got shared relationship, shared time together. You value your relationship. You have to nurture it. It's like your parents. Sometimes they don't want you. They don't accept your choices you make. So you don't abandon them. You don't say, "Oh, for the rest of my life, I will not talk to you." You work on it. You work on it, and that's what Ravi and I did. It took us a long time. Initially, it
But
was
it's
about the
okay to
children.
also leave. Like people tell me,
Yeah,
"Oh my God, you
yeah,
divorced or you are separated, and what happens to the child?" Of course, these are big questions, and it's not like you're just abandoning. I and my
exactly.
husband are also friends. I mean, we have a wonderful child between us, and it's not just amicable. We are there for each other if there is any trouble. And like sometimes people say, "Oh, you don't have a like and listen to her. You don't have a husband in the bedroom ordering you around." Some
Yeah,
of my friends who are sort of tired with overburden of work, and they're like, "You are by yourself. You've got freedom." I said, "Listen, there is duality in everything.
exactly.
As a single mother, there are other challenges that I have. Absolutely, my child has no one else to turn to. Right? It's been almost 4 months, and I'm trying to do all these webinars on different issues and
Sure.
talking
Yeah.
about it. My social advocacy work. I'm trying to write a script. I'm trying to engage my son in non-gadget things,
Yeah.
to ensure that this time is meaningfully spent. So I'm also juggling. So
Sure.
we we are all struggling, but I think when we look at other people's struggle, sometimes our struggle become less. If we keep sort of navel gazing, then we can always complain about things. So I think it's important to see other people's problems and see how we can be at least part of the solution, and even in a small tiny way. None of us
Sure.
are changing anything big, but
True,
I
true.
always say that every drop counts.
I agree. I agree. And I believe that we have to go through whatever we have to go through, but we don't have to hold on to things. One of the reasons I think my story did well, Nandita, is not just because I decided to, they thought I was courageous to leave my marriage and be in a same sex relationship. I think my story was also about that you don't have to stay back in a marriage if you feel it's
Yeah.
over, because it's like infection. It just gets worse and worse and worse.
And
At
only you
least,
will know. Nobody should
correct.
pass judgment on marriage. There are a
Yeah.
lot of farcical marriages that continue just
Yeah.
because they have to show it to the world, or because they think that's the only way a child will have a good upbringing. But children are so sensitive and
Sure.
they understand it. As long as parents can give that love to their children and don't bitch about others, I think they'll
Sure.
be fine. So there
Sure.
is no one way. I'm neither endorsing marriage nor I'm endorsing
Exactly.
separation. Do what feels right to
Right.
you, but be honest to yourself and be
True.
honest to your partner.
And don't judge
That's
the
all.
ones who make the choices either. That's the biggest
Definitely
thing.
don't
Yeah.
judge. I think
Judge.
we all struggle with it. We
Yeah.
all, I mean, I have my areas of judgment. I'm not
Sure.
saying that I struggle with it, but I wonder, I want to be aware. I want to work on them, because judging people is sort of, how can we judge? Because we ourselves are not fallible. We have so many different things. We have ourselves so many contradictions. So who are we to judge anyway?
Absolutely. I'm going to read out some comments shortly, but I wanted to talk to you about labeling.
Hmm.
I heard your interview with Anupama, and it was very interesting. That part that really stayed with me, where you said that if you're a certain manner, they labeled you bossy, or if you ask questions, they said you were confused,
Yeah,
or if you put your points across, you were termed aggressive. So, and this is so
constantly
common.
unable.
This is so common for all of us, women who are independent, who have a voice. So, what do you think is, again, I keep coming back, and how have you managed this? How do you manage this in the film industry,
Problem
especially?
is that as you grow and as you experience sexism, your radars for it become sharper and sharper, which means you're constantly catching sexism all around you, because it's all around you, right? So in some form or the other, sometimes subtle, sometimes overt, and it is tiring because you can feel it, and sometimes you can't even articulate it. Sometimes it's subtle, and the subtler it is, the more difficult it is to combat it or to respond to it. Because if you say something, they'll say, oh, you're being a feminist, and oh, there you go again, kind of a thing. So you have to, I think, some battles you say, okay, forget it, it's not worth fighting. Sometimes you want to call it out and say, listen, that was not the right way, the way you're talking. And also when you are helming projects, like for instance in Manto or Firaaq, or when I'm in a way the boss, I'm the captain of the ship, and yet you're seeing how people are behaving. I have worked with male filmmakers, and I know how people behave differently with, let's say, male filmmakers than they behave with female filmmakers. So many of them constantly call you sir. I mean, that, not that that makes a difference, but the fact that they're just not used to women helming, so especially in this generation, in 10 years later, I'm sure there are a lot of young women who have now gotten into film industry behind the camera doing various things. It's going to probably change, but in today's time, it is tough. They will use words like, oh, stop whining. Even when you are asking for something in a film, you would never use that word with a man,
Yeah.
or just calm down, to say, like, just calm down, it'll happen, don't get so, or like, don't overreact. Or if you're asking, if you think aloud, like my process is often to think aloud. And sometimes people think, oh, you don't know the answer, that's why she must be confused, or she doesn't know it, and she's seeking help. You're just thinking aloud, it's your process. And I like to hear everyone's opinion. And then the director is not a god. It's not, or if there is one, you're not supposed to have all the answers,
Yeah.
but you have to make the decisions. As a director, you make all the decisions, but the more you ask, the more informed you are, and finally you will make the right decision that you think
Sure.
is right. So it is all around. And but we all also label, don't we? All label. We, in
Sure.
terms of region, we say, oh, if it's a Gujarati, must be very money minded, or if it's a
Yeah.
Bengali, it must be, trying to be
Yeah.
intellectual, or if it is this, we all kind of label. Americans are like this, and Australians are like this. And so we all label, and I think it's one thing to say it in jest sometimes, and sometimes to generalize, but we need to be aware
Yeah.
ourselves. I
Sure.
always feel it's easier to point fingers at others, but the journey is really within, of seeing that, okay, where do I label? And also
Sure.
not to be trapped by other people's labels. So the film world thinks of me as an activist, and the activist world thinks of me as a film person. So sometimes, and I don't have any one world, and that sometimes is tiring, because I straddle both worlds and with reasonable ease, but because of that, I'm neither in a glass house where people feel like, oh, you're kind of sheltered and you can't be reached, nor am I sort of absolutely doing sort of ground level work, and I do have a certain sort of public space
Sure.
thing. So I sometimes do get caught in it, and I find it a bit tiring, but it's important not to get weighed down by how people perceive you. You don't,
Sure.
like, sometimes people say, how do we even introduce you? Should we say actor, director, social advocate, or
Yeah.
should we say this? Should we also include writer? I mean, these are all, at the end of the day, these are labels. Just be yourself, and
Yeah.
if you want to do 10 things, do 10 things. If you are passionate about one, do one. Let the world not tell you how you should be, and who you should be.
Sure. I often get told that, oh my God, you're so emotional. Stop being emotional. And I think to
Oh,
myself, "But
I
that is
know.
me." And I tell people, if I wasn't this person, you wouldn't be there either. It's like how it is. But I
Yeah,
think it is about
absolutely.
not allowing ourselves, like you said, to be impacted by what others think of us. My book, Untold Lies, the first book that I wrote is about that how we take on labels that people give us, and we believe in those labels until one day we sit back and say, actually, I'm not that person thought I told me I was 20 years ago, and I believed it for 20 years, and I lived that life, and now
But
actually I.
that's the problem, yeah. When you start believing what the other person's saying, and you start looking at yourself with that lens. And
Correct.
being emotional is not necessarily a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
And they have, and often we impose our own biases and prejudices onto the other,
True.
and yeah, and we all have to be aware of those things.
Nandita, there's one thing that you said again in one of the interviews, which I really loved. You said you need to wear yourself lightly. And I think it's so true.
Yeah, and because otherwise we start taking ourselves too seriously. I mean, especially in this profession where you're constantly having to talk about yourself, and now there is so much media, right? There are so many magazines, there are so many TV channels, there are web portals, and blah blah blah. I mean, you could be talking about yourself constantly, and I think it just I don't know, it's corroding at some level. It's not healthy for a person to be talking so much about oneself. So I'm sort of, that's why, very picky about what I want to say, I mean, where I want to say. And then I use these opportunities to talk. When I'm talking, I'm also talking to myself. So in a way, it's also reminders for myself, or reaffirmations, or not just, of course, it's a way to connect and share, but it's also, you're talking to your own self too, because we're
Sure.
all on that journey. It's not like we have reached anywhere. So in some sense, I'm also kind of re-examining some of the things that I need to look within myself.
Sure. It's wonderful. Should we just look at some of the comments, and then I have one last question before I know it's late for you there,
9:30,
India.
yeah, it's
So
9:30, and it's time for, my son has not seen
yeah,
much of me today
sure,
because of
sure. So
this
we'll let you go in a few
announcement, and
minutes.
yeah.
But I think, is there anything that stands out for you that you'd
I
like
think,
to?
I feel many of them are adding to the conversation, which is what I
Yeah.
love. Like somebody says, cliches and preconceived notions are extremely harmful and can be toxic at times. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. It's uh, so yeah.
So somebody, Shruti Shandalia, from your Miranda house, so proud of you, college mate. So there's lots of good comments here. Keep them coming. Nandita,
Yes, thank you.
I know you have to
Somebody has
go.
put in the listen to her link called. Oh, Nicola has
Yes,
put
that's
it.
Nicola
Okay.
has done that. Here, we'll make sure that that gets around, and people have enjoyed this conversation, which is good, which we expected everyone to, because we have
Someone said
Nandita.
I'm matured as a hermit. Far from it. I also get upset. I get very angry. In fact, I did a talk a year ago. It's a TEDx talk where I talk about anger and how my child is teaching me not to be angry. And I don't know, suddenly it's got a second wind, and I got all these messages from various people recently saying, "Oh, we heard your talk about anger." I said, I can tell you, I'm still struggling with it. I'm slightly better, after a year. So every minute you're kind of working on it, but
Oh,
no hermit at all.
so we've got most of highs, and love to hear Nandita ma'am on crucial
Some
issues.
people are asking whether this would be online again, or is like,
Yes,
would you be putting it on some, like,
so
would there be a link to watch
it
it
will be
later?
available on the same pages, Speaking Minds Global and Totally Out
Etc.
Now. Yes, it will be available on the same pages. It will also be put up on Speaking Minds YouTube page. So it will be available, and we will make sure that any information that Nandita shares with us about various projects that she's working on, we'll definitely put this up on the thread. So thank you so much, audience. And
Thank you.
Nandita,
Thank you. They were
before you
all
go,
lovely.
can I ask you one last question? I
Sure,
just
sure,
have
sure.
this. I'm just very keen to know that if you had to give yourself, your younger self, a piece of advice, what would you say? And I know I'm sure it is a very cliched
Yeah.
question, but really, because I started off with fire 24 years ago. If you were 24 years ago, you were
Mm.
around and you had to tell yourself, this is Nandita and this is my piece of advice to Nandita, what would you tell us?
I think I would say the same that I tell myself even today. Listen to that voice. I think there is a voice within us that sometimes just gets so burdened by so many other voices, so much noise outside, and everyone's telling you different things. And, we just don't hear our own voice. And it's like gut. When you say, I instinctively feel that, I feel it in my gut. It's not really in your gut. I think you have to even nurture your gut to be able to feel it. So in the same way, I think you have to kind of, take care. You have to keep hearing that voice to make that voice stronger and louder and sensible and wise and compassionate. That voice also needs to be worked on. I don't know if that makes sense, but I would say that don't let that, yeah, no, don't let that sort of get lost in all the noise around the world.
Thank you, Nandita. I've always found you very
Thank
sensitive.
you.
I remember meeting you in 2008, I think, a long, long time ago. And you have
Yeah.
changed, but yet you haven't changed. And it's such a beauty. I mean,
Yeah,
you're
I
more
think it's
sensitive.
changed. I mean, when I look at
Yeah.
myself in the last 20, 30 years, I think the core remains the same. But your life experiences and everything else that you've gone through in life, and also the books you read and the films you watch and the people you meet, they all impact you. They all become, in a way, part of you. And you are the same, and yet it's only when you respond to different situations you realize you're actually not the same, because your responses change. So in that sense, I know that I'm less angry than I was 20 years ago. I justified my anger then. Today I don't justify it, and today I struggle with it. But yeah, it's different.
It's okay
Thank
to
you,
be who
Raga.
you are. Thank you very much.
It
Thank
was
you,
a good
Nandita.
way to end
Lovely.
the day as well, after a
Sorry.
mad sort of.
Yeah,
I said it
thank
was a
you.
good way to end my day
Thank
as
you.
well.
Enjoy. And I hope the
Thank you,
narrative keeps
everyone, all of
changing.
you who are online and have heard the
Yeah.
conversation and in many ways participated.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you, audience, for engaging. Thank you, Nandita, and thank you, Nicola Fenton, for helping us behind the
Yes,
scenes. I
thank
know
you,
it was
Nicola.
difficult for us, and please log back in as and when you want to at Totally Out Now or at Speaking Minds Global. And Nandita, thank you very much. I will see you very
I'm going to log
soon.
out.
Thank
Yes.
you. Bye.
Bye.